Walter Block is an Austrian economist who currently teaches at Loyola University. I think he's been an Austrian economist and libertarian since the 60s. He wrote a book called Defending the Undefendable and another one called The Case for Discrimination. They say the best introductions are the shortest, so let's get right to it. How are you, Walter Block?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Anytime. Thank you for coming. So I'd like to ask questions that you don't get asked like a million times, like, why are you a voluntarist and all that stuff. So hopefully let's do some new questions.
Okay.
My first question is, in terms of having anarchy be achieved realistically instead of just a nice theory, what do you think are the ways that anarchy will be something which exists?
Well, in a sense, we already have anarchy between countries. The relationship of Portugal and Brazil is one of anarchy. The relationship of Mexico and China is anarchy in the sense that they don't have anyone above them. That there is no world government yet. The United States is sort of trying to become the world government, but it quite hasn't made it. So there is anarchy in that sense. Not a big sense, not as much as you or I might like, but we're moving in that direction, and the wrong way to move would be toward world government or toward U.S. taking over the world, as Obama and Bush, I think, would like. As to, apart from that, how can we achieve the free society or the stateless society? Well, by convincing people. I don't think you can shoot people. I mean, we'd have to shoot everybody pretty much because there's only 1/10 of us. Not that that would be justified, and it wouldn't work anyway. I think the way to do it is to convince people, sort of like what we're now doing. You and I are now trying to convince people of it by having this interview. Not that we're going to be doing much. It's sort of like, what was that joke? There's the mouse sitting on the elephant, and as the elephant goes across this bridge, the bridge sways, and the mouse says, "We made that bridge sway." Well, you and I aren't going to make it sway, but Ron Paul might be doing that. Ayn Rand did a bit of it, even though she's not an anarchist, but she moved people in the direction of free enterprise, and I think those two are the main two that have converted more people to free enterprise and liberty and libertarianism than anyone else. So our hats are off, I think, to Ayn Rand and Ron Paul. And what we have to do is follow their lead, write books, do interviews, write articles, give public speeches, teach, whatever. Those are the ways I think we can achieve the free or anarchist society.
Very good. I read an article, I think it was written by an objectivist, and it basically said the problem with anarcho-capitalism is that everyone has a different perception of what non-aggression is. It isn't so clear-cut. Is circumcision a violation of the non-aggression principle? Some say yes, some say no. Is abortion? Some say yes, some say no. So you really, if you have an anarcho-capitalist society, you're not going to have non-aggression because you're going to have certain people who say this is aggression, and that's not. So we might as well have a monopoly on violence to ensure that there aren't just these conflicting people who have different impressions of what aggression is. What would you say to counter that argument?
Well, I think it's sort of sweeping it under the rug because, as you say, there are differences on abortion, on many, many different issues. And one way to deal with it is to let the government decide. But how is the government going to decide? There's going to be problems there. I think a better way to decide these things is to have free societies where we have private courts, and the private courts would hopefully make a better determination than public courts for the usual reasons that private is better than public, because you have incentives to do a good job, whereas in the public those incentives are greatly attenuated. So I appreciate the objection, and it's a powerful objection. I don't, sweep it under the rug, but I think that answer is an attempt to sweep it under the rug because you don't really answer anything by just saying, well, let the state do it. Well, but on what criteria should the state do it? And there are many different states, and they can fight, and we can fight with the state. So if you want to reduce violence, which I think is very good, I think a much better way of reducing violence is to not have violence in the very beginning, from the outset, which the government is. I mean, the government is a violent institution, so I don't see how we can go to them and say, please, Mr. Government, reduce violence, because they're based on violence.
Cool. So this is a two-part question. I think it's important to play devil's advocate, so I want to do that here.
Please, please.
One thing that I've heard a lot is that we have to take the world as it currently exists. Like, I have certain friends who say to me, in theory, I agree with you that America should not be the policeman in the world. But if America isn't the policeman of the world, do you think there's not going to be a policeman in the world? There will be, and an even more tyrannical government will take its place. So it's better that we have America, who isn't as tyrannical, do it. It might be bad. Taxation is theft, but if we don't have any taxation, then we'll just have people rob you of even more money. And isn't it better, you know, government may pinch you, then someone else will chop off your arm? And I think essentially people's worry is, you know, I have a friend who's a utilitarian, and he said, better, you know, I know if I advocate to steal $1,000 from a millionaire, that's theft, but the damage of the millionaire is much smaller compared to the gain that the poor person gets. He could still own his yacht, he could still have a good life, where now you don't want to use any aggression, and because of that, a poor person is starving to death. I want to use a little aggression, and now I'm saving a poor person's life.
Hey, you've converted me. I'm no longer. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You've really asked three questions. Let me ask three. One was the international, one was the intranational, and the third was this welfare of taking money from rich and giving it to the poor. First, let's take the international one. If the U.S. isn't the hegemon, the world leader, they'll get some bad one. The Nazi Germany or Iran or North Korea will be the leader. Well, I don't think that's true. I think that if right now we have, about 200 different countries, I'd rather see 5,000 or 6,000 countries than 200 countries, many, many smaller countries. My ideal country is sort of the size of, I don't know what, Liechtenstein or Monaco or, I don't know, the Netherlands or Norway or those little countries. I'm sorry?
Or the room you're in.
I can't hear you.
Or the room you're in.
The room I'm in, well, obviously better to have 7 billion countries where we're each sovereign, but if we have to have countries of the sort that people recognize, Monaco is a lot better than Russia or China or any of these big, gigantic countries. I don't think it follows that if the U.S. were more Ron Paul doesn't like the word isolationist. More if we minded our own business, other people would take over the world. I don't see anyone else taking over the world. China is trying to take over the China Sea, and they're having trouble with Japan and Korea and other countries, Australia. Russia, you know, Murray Rothbard, my mentor and hero, Murray Rothbard used to say that just because the Soviet Union was a pain in the neck and horrible internally doesn't mean that they were externally. The Russian foreign policy or the Soviet foreign policy wasn't as grandiose or imperialistic as the British one or as the American one. Right now we have, 1,000 military bases in about 160 foreign countries. No other country's got anything like that. So I think if we pulled back our troops and kept them home, I don't see anyone else taking over the world, and certainly even if they did, which I very much doubt, what's it to us? I mean, nobody's going to attack us. We have a defense budget. Well, it's really an offense budget, but we'll let that go. Bigger than the next 14 or 15 different countries in the whole world. I mean, that's just crazy. So I think it's factually untrue that if the U.S. weren't the world leader or the hegemon, somebody else would, and they would be worse, and we might as well do it. Okay, the second one is intranationally. We have to have public police, because if we don't have public police, you know, the bad guys are going to rip us off or rape us or God knows what. And I think, you know, it's very unclear. Yes, the police do stop some rapes, they do stop some murders, they do stop some carjackings and kidnappings. On the other hand, they create a lot of violence too with the promotion of their drug laws and other victimless crime laws and all sorts of traffic laws and stuff like that. To me, it's sort of unclear as to whether on net balance the police are creating more crime or reducing crime. Whereas the example I like to use is I live in New Orleans, and I'm about a quarter of a mile away from Audubon Park, and maybe Central Park in New York City would be as good an example. Where is it safer, in Audubon Park or Central Park or in Disney World? Disney World is run privately. They have private police. If you're acting obstreperously in Disney World, you're going to be surrounded by a bunch of mice and ducks and cows, all packing heat and being very polite and saying, you know, step over here, sir. And they've got cameras there. It's very, very safe. The reason is that if a murder or a rape, God forbid, occurs in those places, Six Flags or any of these private places, or a shopping mall or anything like that, people will lose money who are in a position to do something about it, so we have very little of it. Whereas if a murder or a rape or a robbery occurs in one of these public parks or on the public street, does the mayor lose money? Does the city commissioner lose money? No, none of them lose money. So their incentives to stop this sort of a thing are greatly attenuated. So my claim is that we would be safer with private police than public police, and we shouldn't infer, and I know you don't, you're being a devil's advocate, but just because we don't have public police doesn't mean we're not going to have police. We have Rent-A-Cop, and they're better in many ways than the official police. The third one is taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. And you know, the rich guy lights his cigars with a $100 bill, whereas for the poor, a $100 bill is the difference between starving and not starving, that kind of an argument. Well, there are a lot of fallacies there. The utilitarian fallacy is that if you do that, you're not going to really help the poor because the poor are going to move somewhere else. There was this guy, Bjorn Borg, who was a very famous tennis player in Sweden, and Sweden had a tax rate of 110%, which means if Bjorn Borg makes an extra 100,000, they tax him 110,000, so he's 10,000 behind. He moved to Monaco. So how is that going to help the poor in Sweden if the rich people leave? And secondly, it's invalid to assume that the money of the rich means less to the rich guy than the money to the poor means to the poor guy. Maybe what the poor guy is going to do with his money is just get drunk, and the rich guy would have invented something great, cure for cancer, cure for AIDS, or what have you. So I think on many grounds, this argument that the best way to help the poor is to seize money from the rich is just nonsense. The poor are much better off in relatively free countries where the rich can employ them and have capital than in countries where they, like Venezuela, they're forever taking money away from the rich and the rich are leaving. And here Ayn Rand comes in and gives this case of the Starnes factory in her book Atlas Shrugged, which is a brilliant way of showing that the best way to help the poor is to not rob the rich. The best way to help the poor is to allow the rich and the poor to have a free enterprise system, and everyone can prosper there.
Right. Yeah, right. Because I mean, one of the things that I tell people is who is hiring more people, the waiter of a restaurant or the owner of the restaurant. When you soak the rich, all you're really doing is shooting yourself in the foot.
Yes, or maybe higher up.
Right. Yes.
In the crotch.
That's right. I think it was Thomas Sowell. I think in his book Intellectuals in Society. It's a good book, although I think there are things wrong with it. One of the things he said was he was criticizing the nuclear disarmament movement during the time of Nazi Germany, and he said that I'm blanking out of that Chamberlain, right? Chamberlain disarmed, and because of that, Hitler was able to take over Europe. So see, this is what happens. The people who say we have to disarm our nuclear bombs, then you allow people from other countries like a Hitler to say, oh, you're vulnerable, now I have my nuclear weapons, and I'm going to use them to attack you. So what would you say in response to that for the people who say that we should keep our nuclear weapons?
The Hitler argument is a very good one, a very good criticism of foreign policy of Ron Paul. What about Hitler? Don't we have to arm, otherwise Hitler will overrun us? Well, there's a lot wrong with that. First of all, getting back to Murray Rothbard's view that you can't infer, you can't deduce from internal policy to external policy. Just because he was a mass murderer internally doesn't mean that he was trying to take over the world. His demands were mainly to get back Alsace-Lorraine, which was seized from Germany by France in the aftermath of World War I, to get back the Polish corridor, which again was German-speaking people seized by Poland. He was just trying to put back Germany back to where it was before World War I. He wasn't trying to, invade, I don't know, Venezuela or invade China or anything else like that. So that's one point. The second point, I think, even more, is that the reason we have Hitler is because of the U.S. The U.S. created Hitler. How did the U.S. create Hitler? The U.S. created Hitler by getting into World War I. World War I, I think, started in 1917, and we got into it. The United States got into it in 1919. Well, for the first 2 or 3 years of that war, it was a tie. It was they were fighting and losing troops by the thousands over 3 inches of terrain. The Axis and the Allied powers were roughly equal in power, and they were just killing each other. And neither was going to win, as far as anyone could see. Probably they would have all run out of troops, and they would have had to end the war, and that would have been it. Instead, what happened is the U.S. got into it mainly because the bankers, the crony capitalists, had more bonds in England than in Germany. If it was the other way around, the U.S. would have got in on Germany's side. But we got in on England's side, and England and France, and the Allies, and then what we did is we beat them, because the U.S. piled on, and then we had the Treaty of Versailles, and even Keynes was against the Treaty of Versailles. Said it's very unfair to Germany. It said Germany was at fault completely, and then it had all sorts of repercussions, very negative for Germany, and the Germans were practically starving. And because of poor banking policy, attributable in part to this, they had the German hyperinflation of 1923, which even further ruined the country. And then that gave rise to Hitler. He was a great demagogue. Look, if the U.S. hadn't gotten into World War I, and we hadn't had the Treaty of Versailles and the hyperinflation of Germany of 1923, Hitler would have been a house painter probably, and we'd never heard of him. We'd never have had World War II. So this whole argument that the U.S. has got to intervene in foreign wars because of the Hitler, and then the Hitler is whoever Hassan in Iraq, or the guy in Syria, or the Libya. I mean, anyone's a Hitler who we don't like. Right. I think it's just nonsensical. Now, with regard to nuclear power, as a libertarian, I think that nuclear power is unjustified because it can't distinguish between guilty and innocent. It just kills everybody. Even if we didn't have nuclear bombs, nobody is going to be attacking us because we have very, very powerful conventional weapons. Although I do admit that the mutual assured destruction, MAD, kept the Cold War cold. Namely, we weren't killing each other. And my hope is that if ever Iran gets the bomb, Israel has already got it, they will have an MAD of their own, and it'll be a very cold war. And hopefully with the election of the new guy in Iran, I forget his name, but the new president, who's wishing Jews happy Rosh Hashanah. I mean, Ahmadinejad never did anything like that. Whereas the new guy is saying, I wish the Jews in Iran, especially a happy Rosh Hashanah, and the Jews everywhere a happy Rosh Hashanah. That doesn't sound like a guy who's wanting to take over the world or is the latest Hitler. And in any case, there's a Jewish community in Iran. I don't know how I got on Iran, but the nuclear power, it's all your fault. I'm kidding. They have a community, a Jewish community of some 25,000, and none of them are leaving. They're staying there. It's a stable society, which indicates that Iran is no Hitler.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think the Treaty of Versailles, actually in Mein Kampf himself, Hitler called Woodrow Wilson the great American savior. That's probably because he allowed him to get into power. My next question is, you said you disagree with Murray Rothbard 99.9%.
Oh, so, no, I agree with him, 99.
Oh, sorry, you agree with him, 99.9%. Right, so the 0.01%, what do you disagree with him, and what do you think he was inconsistent, and why?
Well, there are 4 or 5 technical economic issues. I don't know if you want to get into that, but
Sure.
let me mention the non-technical Austrian economic issues, the libertarian issues, which most of the audience would be more familiar with. There are 2 that I can think of. One is abortion, and the other is immigration. Now, on immigration, it's sort of difficult because there's Murray Rothbard 1 and then there's Murray Rothbard 2. Murray Rothbard 1 I agree with entirely. Total open borders, anyone go anywhere they want. And the argument, the counter-argument to that as well, will be inundated by 17 zillion Chinese, and they'll take over or whatever. And my argument there is, let's privatize every square inch of U.S. territory. Every square inch, parks, roads, you name it, it's private. Now you can't have immigration because immigration would be trespass. This is a point that Murray Rothbard and Hans Hoppe, another favorite person of mine, make.
Right.
So my answer to the we'll be inundated by Mexicans or Chinese or Martians or people from the future, as they had in South Park, just privatize everything, and now there's no more immigration problem. And if you don't want to privatize everything, well, then you deserve to be inundated. Namely, in a libertarian society, we wouldn't be inundated. And I'm a libertarian. I'm trying to promote liberty. I'm not trying to save anything other than that. I think the best way to save everything is through liberty. Okay, so that's Murray Rothbard 1, and I agree with him. But now what happened was Murray Rothbard changed his mind, and I think he changed his mind based on what happened with Latvia and Lithuania and those other small little countries on the northwest part of the Soviet Union. What happened was the Soviet Union took a whole bunch of ethnic Russians and marched them in there, and there was no really more Lithuanian or Latvian culture, or Estonia, I think, is the third one. But this, to me, I think Murray is mistaken, because this was not a natural immigration. This was the Soviet Union relocating people. So how do you base a libertarian view on what the Soviet Union did in a violent way? So my view, I disagree with Murray Rothbard 2, namely the view that he had after he changed, and the view that Hans Hoppe has, and I agree with Hans on virtually everything also except immigration. Okay, so that's the first one. The second major disagreement that I have with Murray is on abortion, and here I agree. Here I disagree not only with my favorite guy Murray Rothbard, but also with another favorite person of mine, Ron Paul. And it's interesting that the 2 of them disagree with each other, because Murray Rothbard is pro-life, pro-choice, and Ron Paul is pro-life. And here, 2 of my libertarian heroes disagree with each other, and I disagree with both of them. I think that both are wrong, and I have a third view, the view I call evictionism, and I think that that's the correct libertarian view on this. So let me spend a minute or 2 outlining that. First of all, I say, and I disagree with Murray on this, I say that human life begins with the fertilized egg. Now, you know when human life begins in the Jewish tradition?
I think it's after I would imagine a bris. No, 30 days.
No. When the fetus graduates from medical school. What kind of Jew do you call yourself? Of course, medical school. No, not the bris. The technical is when there's a heartbeat. That's my understanding, when there's a heartbeat. But my view is that the human being starts with a fertilized egg. Why? Because the sperm alone and the egg alone will not become a human being if put in the right environment. And if you and I are not in the right environment, we'll die. Namely, we have to have oxygen and other good stuff like that. Whereas a fertilized egg, if put in the right environment, namely the mother's womb, will become a human being. So that's a human being right from the get-go. So I disagree with Murray there, and I agree with Ron Paul. Namely, that's when life starts. But as a libertarian, I have to base my analysis on private property rights. And who owns the private property rights? Who owns the womb? Obviously, the mother. The mother owns the womb. And if somebody is in your property against your will, you can't kill them. If I trespass and I sit in your living room, you just can't shoot me. If I was there unconscious, somebody brought me there, you can't just shoot me. You have to remove me in the gentlest manner possible. You call a hospital, you call an orphanage if I'm a baby or whatever. But you don't have to keep me in your living room for 9 minutes, 9 months, 9 years, 90 years. You don't have to keep me there at all. You just have to remove me gently. So what I say is that if there's a fetus in a mother's womb and the mother doesn't want it for whatever reason, she can evict it but not kill it. Whereas the abortionists, the pro-choice people, think that she can kill it, which seems to me monstrous based on libertarian theory. So she can evict it. Now, happily, right now with medical technology, in the last trimester, 7, 8, and 9 months, the fetus is just about as viable outside the womb as inside the womb. So if we adopt evictionism, we pro-lifers, and I consider myself sort of a pro-life, at least in spirit, will have saved 1/3 of all babies, which is pretty good. Whereas right now, the pro-choice forces are in the ascendancy, and if we stick like an ostrich with its head in the stand and say, no, 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 it's got to be pro-life, pro-life, pro-life. Right now, 1/3 of babies dies, or at least is at risk of dying. But the kicker is that as medical technology improves, we will move back in the pregnancy cycle. So in 10 or 15 years, instead of 7, 8, and 9 months, it might be 6, 7, 8, and 9 months. And then in 30 years, maybe the 5th month or the 4th month. So eventually, if we adopt evictionism, we will win. We pro-lifers will win. Babies will be safe at any point in the pregnancy, at any of the 9 months, because we will have established libertarian eviction theory. So I think on utilitarian grounds it's really great, and also it's a compromise. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block, because I'm so moderate. It's a compromise. Stop laughing.
It's all right.
It's really a compromise, and it's a principled compromise. You know, like if you say 2 + 2 is 4, and I say 2 + 2 is 6, a non-principled compromise is, okay, well, let's make 2 + 2 5. That would be, sort of added up and divide by 2, and that's a compromise. This evictionism is not a compromise like that. It's a principled compromise based on private property rights. Human life starts at the inception, the fertilized egg, and you can evict from your territory at any time you want.
So do you think that abortions which are currently practiced not using evictionism, should that be illegal?
Yeah, sure. It's murder. I mean, what they now do is they have this thing, partial birth abortion. They'll take a baby who is.
That's certainly, I would argue, murder. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I would argue that certainly. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you got a baby who's 8.5 months old in the womb, and perfectly viable. You could just give him birth, or birth him, or evict him, or eject him, and he'd be perfectly fine. Instead, what they do is they reach into the womb and they suck his brains out and pull out the dead husk of a body. I mean, if that's not first-degree murder, I don't know what is. So that's really utterly and totally despicable. And Ron Paul tells the story of taking perfectly live babies and putting them in a bucket and letting them cry their way to death. Yeah. That's just...
Yeah. One of the things that I've never understood, just to stay on the abortion issue, is why people bring up, well, how about rape? Because at least from my point of view, if we're talking about rights, how the baby got in there is wholly irrelevant. And why should you punish the fetus for what the father did? That, I think, sets a very dangerous precedent.
Absolutely. I mean, the rape is a very good insight. I mean, the feminists will say that we now favor rape, but that's silly. The father of the baby is a vicious animal, and I shouldn't even use animal. Vicious, depraved creature. No. But the baby is totally innocent. So, and yet, surely even the most avid pro-choicers, or rather pro-lifers, will make an exception for rape and incest. But why should they? If they were logically consistent, the baby is innocent. Why should you, not keep this baby alive? So I think you're very insightful when you mention.
I agree. It's not alive anymore based on how it got in there. It seems a bit ridiculous to me. Right. And I would assume you also disagree with Murray Rothbard in terms of voluntary slavery, right? Because he said.
Yes, I forgot. That's another one, right? Voluntary slavery. That's another one. Apart from these technical Austrian economic issues, voluntary slavery. Thanks. You know more about my views than I do. I totally forgot that one. Yes, I think that if my son has got a horrible operation and it needs $5 million to cure him, we don't have Obamacare yet, otherwise that would save us, of course. I'm kidding.
Right.
And I value his life more than my freedom. And you, a very rich man, have long wanted me to be your slave so you can interview me all day. And you give me $5 million, and now I give it to my son's doctors, and we save his life, and now I've become your slave. That seems to be a reasonable contract. I mean, if I own myself, I should be able to sell it, and if I
Yeah,
can't
I would.
sell it,
Yeah,
I don't really own it.
I would agree with you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I think what Murray Rothbard was saying, and maybe here's just an example, is that Murray Rothbard, I think, would say that you could always change your mind. So maybe he would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, there are certain lease agreements where you agree to be my tenant for a year, where I think Murray Rothbard would say, well, if a person changes their mind after 5 months, do they really have to stay there for the remaining term?
No, they don't have to stay there. They just have to pay the rent. The landlord doesn't insist that you stay there. He'd be happy to see the rear end of you receding into the distance as long as you pay the rent, and then he can rent it for the other 7 months to someone else and make extra money. So the lease just means you're responsible for the rent money, and you can get a substitute tenant. But this idea of changing your mind, look, you are now wearing a green T-shirt, I see, and you paid $10 for it, and if you go back to the guy from whom you bought it and say, well, I changed my mind, give me my money back, he's going to sort of laugh at you. What do you mean changed your mind? This was a final sale. This wasn't a provisional rental of the T-shirt. Mm-hmm. So if I sell myself into slavery to you, and then later on I say, well, you're interviewing me too much, and I don't like the cut of your jib, and I change my mind, I now want to run away from you, well, I'm stealing a very valuable piece of your property. I mean, the whole ethos or the whole essence of the libertarian theory of property rights is you can't change your mind when you make a final sale. So the question is, should we allow final sales like this? And I don't see why not. And if we don't, then my son dies, which I greatly regret, and you don't get me to be your slave, which you greatly regret. So why shouldn't we have this contract? I don't see it. Murray says, well, you can't sell the will. And my answer to that is Will Schmill. I'm not trying to sell the will. I'm just trying to sell the bod. I mean, I can't really be in control of my will. I might hate you as your slave and you whip me too much or whatever it is. But I'm not selling my will, which I admit I can't sell because, I have not that much control over it that I can give it to you. Mm-hmm. But I'm not selling my will. What I'm selling is the right such that when you whip me, I can't call the private police and say, hey, assault and battery, put this guy in jail. Because if I do, you'll show a bill of sale, and presumably if it's a libertarian cop will say, well, sorry, Block, stop complaining. You signed this contract. He's your legitimate slave owner, and shut up and, obey better, and he won't whip you as much or something like that.
My other question is, what is the problem with taxation beyond theft? I mean, because one of the things that I've said is I think the problem with taxation is that since you don't have to pay the penalty for being irresponsible, you'll be more irresponsible. If I have to go to war with someone and I could pay someone to fight in my stead with other people's money, I'm going to be more bloodthirsty than if I have to pay with my own money. So what do you think really is the problem with taxation?
Well, I'm not sure I fully understood what you said. I mean, to me, the problem with taxation is that it's theft because it's an involuntary payment. We didn't agree. Now, people say, well, it's sort of like club dues. If you join the chess club or the tennis club or the golf club, you have to pay dues. And, if you don't pay, they won't let you in, which seems, eminently reasonable. And then they say, well, the U.S. government is sort of like a club, and if you don't like it, leave. Mm-hmm. And my answer is, it's not like a club. Nobody agreed to join. And it assumes they usually leave. Let them leave if they don't like it. Based on the libertarian theory of private property rights, we have all homesteaded land, and we should be allowed to live on our land that we homesteaded and not pay anything to anyone. Lysander Spooner, a very very famous within libertarian circles. Nobody else has ever heard of him. He says government is like a highwayman, and at least the highwayman has the decency after he robs you to leave you alone. He doesn't follow you and say, well, you can't drink more than 16 ounces of soda, or you have to save for a rainy day and Social Security. He has the decency to leave you, whereas the government, not only does it act like a highwayman and steal your money, but it starts bugging you and trying to correct you and treat you like a moron. So I see taxes as slavery. Now, obviously, the point you're making if we have taxes, government can more easily pursue wars. I certainly agree with that, but government can do a lot of bad things with taxes.
Right. I was just thinking.
This reminds me of another point. You know, some people say we ought to legalize marijuana because then the government can tax it. And I say we ought to legalize marijuana in spite of the fact that they can tax it. They've already got enough money. They don't need any more money. And I'm almost thinking maybe we shouldn't legalize marijuana because they're going to tax it, but I hold back from that precipice. Mm-hmm. And I say, well, you know, marijuana should be legalized, and they shouldn't tax it. But if they do tax it, and we full well realize that they will tax it, then we vote or favor legalization of marijuana, sort of holding our noses because we don't want them to have more money. So taxes are not a good thing. Taxes are a bad thing. Taxes are theft.
Right. Now I want to turn the conversation a little and talk to Justice. A few things. One, I think it was Shanklin and a few other people said that they believe in all criminal courses the state sets itself up as judge, jury, and executioner, and therefore, irrespective of the crime a person is charged with, you should do jury nullification, even if it is a violation of the non-aggression principle, because it's not a fair trial and it's a kangaroo trial. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, you see, that's why I'm Walter Moderate Block. That's pretty radical. I mean, if there were, let's stipulate the facts. Let's not assume that we don't know. There was this murderer. The guy who shot up those little kids in Connecticut, or the Aurora, Colorado, who shot up a movie theater, and let's say we've got him on film, and he confesses, and there are witnesses, and there's no question that he's a murderer. And now he's brought up for trial, and I'm on the jury. According to this, we should let that bastard go because it's an unfair trial? No. That's crazy. You see, the government is just a band of robbers. And this guy is also a band of robbers, or rather there are two criminals. The government criminal and this mass murdering criminal. Not that the government isn't also a mass murdering criminal, but it didn't shoot up a little kindergarten in Connecticut or a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. So when there are two murderers contending with each other, what you want to do is, you know, wish them both well or something. You don't want to not stop the murder. Look, suppose there were a cop who could have stopped the guy. Should I have shot the cop to protect this murderer who goes into the kindergarten and starts shooting little 6-year-old kids? No, that's just absolutely crazy. I think what that does is it gives government too much credence. And we have to realize that, yes, they have good PR, but they're just a bunch of robbers, no different deontologically, ethically, from any other robber. So if they're going to stop a murder or a rape, or going to punish a murderer or a rapist, I applaud that. I wouldn't nullify that. If I were a jury nullifier, I would just nullify victimless crimes. Which, let me tell you a little bit of story about this. What happened is this friend of mine, I won't mention his name, but he's a lawyer in Arizona, and he was offered a judgeship. And I said, take it. He said, no, I have to be honest with these bastards. And he wrote him a letter saying, well, you know, when it comes to murder and theft and rape, I'll be a good judge, and I'll look at the facts and I'll render a good decision. However, when it comes to victimless crimes like sex, prostitution, drugs, gambling, whatever, I'm letting them all go because those are victimless crimes. And of course they said, we don't want you to be a judge. He was giving too much credence to the government. You don't have to be honest with them. They're a bunch of rascals. They're a bunch of criminals.
I agree. I think it was Murray Rothbard who said, just like you don't have to be honest with the jewel thief when he robs your house where are the hidden valuables, you can lie in your tax form.
Absolutely. Not that we advocate anything illegal, God forbid. Hello? But, and certainly not for the U.S. government, which is a wonderful government and never violated anyone's rights. But we're talking platonically here because we don't want to go to jail. So the government of Ruritania, yes, its taxes are very bad.
Right. Two questions that people have said me their concerns in a free society. If someone is being aggressed against, who, let's say, is a child, and you know it's an abortion in the not way of where it's actually a murder, or someone's aggressed against and he has no family members, who seeks justice on his behalf? Who is able to defend the people who can't defend themselves?
Well, Murray Rothbard answered this, I think, very correctly. He said there's this group called Friends of Babies or Friends of Homeless Bums. like take the homeless bum, and every once in a while some vicious people will set a homeless bum afire and kill him that way.
Sorry, can you say it again?
I say there will be societies or groups called Friends of Bums or Friends of Children or Friends of Helpless People. Every once in a while, can you hear me okay now? Hello? Hello? Did we lose each other? Hello? I don't know what's happening. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you
Yeah,
again.
sorry. I think we froze for a minute.
Yeah, for a second you weren't moving around, and now we're back.
We're back. Sorry.
No problem. The question was, what about helpless people like bums on the street or children who don't have parents or orphans or whoever? Who will protect them? Well, first of all, you have to realize that every crime will take place on some property, and all property in a libertarian society will be privately owned. So if there's a person who is hurt sitting on a park bench, the owner of that park isn't going to much like that, and he's going to protect the people on his terrain. So that's one way of protecting helpless people. Another is friends of bums or friends of children or friends of the Alzheimer's people or whoever. Sort of like the, I don't know, Institute for Justice now goes around having cases to help people who are victimized by government. These groups would sue in behalf of their clients.
That makes sense. One of the things that I've noticed is at least in my experience, when I talk to people, it seems like people respond more. I mean, everyone's different, but I think a lot of people respond who is saying the argument more so than what the argument is. So, if someone doesn't like Ayn Rand, they're not going to actually talk about her argument. They're going to say, oh, she was a friends with a lot of ad hominem attacks or guilt by association. And sometimes, and it sort of upsets me, I've even seen in the libertarian community, oh, statists are sheep, they're idiots, they're violent. And to me, this isn't helpful. I think the way to persuade people is saying, look, I want to do the right thing, you want to do the right thing, we both want to do the right thing, let's, be adults, no name calling, and,
Well, I think the technical name for what you're talking about is ad hominem, against the person as opposed to the idea. And this is always invalid because, just because somebody is stupid or evil, they could still be correct on something. They say that if you have an infinite number of monkeys and an infinite number of computers crawling around on the keyboard, eventually you'll come up with, I don't know, Julius Caesar or the Bible or something like that. And yet they're monkeys and they're not doing it purposefully, but they would be doing whatever it is. They could write Man, Economy, and State for all I know. But the other question you're asking is very interesting, and that is, well, how best can we convert people to the one true faith, namely free enterprise, liberty, freedom, libertarianism? And here I'm a methodological individualist. I say there are different strokes for different folks. Look, Ayn Rand and Ron Paul were two of the most successful people in converting others to the freedom movement, and yet they had almost opposite personalities. Mm-hmm. Ron Paul is so gentle. I mean, he's sort of like a huggy bear. Yeah. And no matter what you say about Ayn Rand, no one ever said she was gentle and like a huggy bear. I mean, her eyes were flashing, and she was, ready to kick butt. And I mean, they both had roughly the same views, but their demeanor was very different. And there's this guy who accused me of being a macho flash, and this was bad because, I don't know, macho flash, I'm just sort of, like in my book, Defending the Undefendable, I go out on various limbs and defend extreme cases. That works for some people. I'm sort of like Ayn Rand in this, not like Ron Paul, whereas Ron Paul is much more gentle, and let's discuss this logically and reasonably, and he doesn't take really rabid positions, although for the mainstream, for the New York Times, what he's saying is very rabid. For us libertarians, he's very moderate, and he expresses himself very moderately. Whereas Murray Rothbard was, and Ayn Rand was sort of more take no prisoners type of people, and I don't say either one is right. I think each person should allow their own personality to come to the fore and do what they feel is comfortable, because like for some people, Ayn Rand is going to fail because she's too rabid. But other people need a slap in the face, intellectually speaking. And for other people, Ron Paul is going to succeed or fail. It depends upon where they're at. So I don't think there's any one right way to convert people to the freedom movement. I think everyone who is in the freedom movement should convert people to the best of their ability, try different modalities, try different ways of doing it, and see what works, and whatever they're most comfortable with, and whatever is the most fun for them, because we're supposed to have fun as libertarians. Promoting liberty should be an enjoyable thing, and we shouldn't try to stretch ourselves into something that we're not.
Right.
So that would be my answer to that.
My next question is, I know, like, certain people, you mentioned that you went after, like, Stefan Molyneux and Mendy McElroy for criticizing Ron Paul. But at least from what I heard from them wasn't, I don't like Ron Paul, he's a bad human being, but their belief that, first of all, that people have to be ready to embrace liberty. If Ron Paul was president and there was a libertarian society and people were ready for it, there would be riots and everyone would say, look, this was a libertarian in office. So is it really in our interest to have a libertarian when if people are rioting that they're off the government dole, and they simply don't believe that political action is the way to achieve liberty? You disagree, maybe I'll disagree, but why do you think that they're not friends of libertarians just because they have that disagreement in terms of approach?
Well, I hate to say it, but, you know, Ron's my man. I have a man crush on him. I love him.
I like him too.
I just drool all over him, not literally, but and anyone who attacks my man Ron is going to have to deal with me. And Wendy McElroy and Stefan Molyneux, and there are other libertarians who I respect and revere on other issues, on most issues, 99.9 of issues. When they attack Ron Paul, I sort of get my dander up. Look, first of all, you're giving me two arguments. One, utilitarian, the other deontological. The utilitarian is it wouldn't work. It would rebound against us. The other is even if it would work, it's still wrong to do it. Let me answer both of them. The first of one, a utilitarian, Ron couldn't get rid of Social Security. Ron couldn't get rid of welfare because these are things that he needs cooperation from the Senate and the Congress and mayors and other people like that. Although if he got elected, he might have coattails enough to help in that direction. But probably he couldn't do it. But there's one thing he could have done. He could have withdrew all the troops from Afghanistan like that. He could have withdrew all the troops from Iraq and not put them in Syria. And I don't know how many troops we've got. Millions of troops all over the place that are sort of like sticking sticks into a hornet's nest. That would have stopped. There wouldn't have been any more blowback. And he might have even, you know, the Arab countries are big on reparations. You know, if you apologize. If Ron Paul would have got up there after becoming president and said, look, we were wrong, we admit it, and we're going to pay $10,000 per life that was lost or whatever, please forgive us, and we're not going to do it anymore, and we're pulling all the troops back, there'd be no more blow-up. There'd be no more reason for airplane searches or, you know, any worries about what is it at the Boston Marathon or any of these kind of things. Now you go to a football game and you can't even bring a pocketbook or a woman pocketbook. You have to be searched everywhere. We'd have peace, and we'd stop killing masses of people. So in terms of utilitarianism, President is commander-in-chief of the army, and he would not have to get any congressional approval for anything. Those troops would come back in a matter of weeks. As soon as the ships and the planes could bring them back, they'd be back, and we'd have a very much better society at home. Not that we'd use the money for public things, but we'd reduce taxes greatly, and we'd have a magnificent society. So on utilitarian grounds, I disagree with them. Now let's talk about deontological grounds. One more utilitarian ground, and that is in becoming president, he would be giving his imprimatur to the government. Well, this is related to the deontological, but the point is we give imprimatur to the government in many ways. We use the post office. Should we stop using the post office? We use fiat currency. I have dollar bills in my wallet. You do too. So does Stefan Molyneux, and so does Wendy McElroy. So does every libertarian. They all use the post office. They all use highways, streets, roads. Uh, some of them go to public schools, although some of them won't, but I think they should go to public schools if they want to. They should become professors in public schools. They should remember Ragnar Danishkold, who seized government ships, and if the government is going to, give them money, we should take it. Ron Paul, I once wrote, should Ron Paul accept matching funds for his campaign? And I said, utilitarian-wise, probably not, because people won't understand. But deontologically, he's just taking money from an evil institution, namely the U.S. government, or rather the government. The U.S. is a wonderful government. I sometimes forget myself. So my answer, to sum this up, my answer to Molyneux and McElroy is Ron Paul is my man. He's creating more libertarians than anyone else nowadays. You ought to be kissing his shoes. Instead, you're whining and carping and say he's not a libertarian. Look, nobody agrees with anyone 100%. I even disagree with myself sometimes. They might change my mind.
I agree with myself.
I come out and I start attacking the person who's doing more for liberty than anyone else, 10 times more for liberty than anyone else, is just despicable. Now, Rand Paul is a different issue. I'm not writing a book. I have a book called Yes to Ron Paul and Liberty, and I'm very proud of that book. I'm very happy with that book. I'm not writing a book about Yes to Rand Paul and Liberty, and if Wendy McElroy and Stephen Molyneux and other people want to attack Rand Paul, and Bob, my friend Bob Wenzel, is doing a magnificent job of attacking him, I'm not saying squat. I'm not defending Rand Paul. Rand Paul, I don't know, on my libertarian meter I give him, I don't know, a 60, 65, 70, whereas Ron I give 97 or 98% or something like that. I mean, Rand Paul is the most libertarian senator and maybe the most libertarian person we've got in Congress since Ron Paul, but Rand is no Ron. And I'm not going to the mattresses over Rand, as they say in the mafia. But I did and I do go to the mattresses over Ron. Ron is magnificent, and you criticize him, not lefties. I don't attack lefties. It's sort of like shooting fish in a barrel or something. The lefties were always attacking him. Although it was interesting, they'd have these lefties, the progressives, they were really having an internal fight over him. The libertarian, the lefty supporters of Ron was saying, yeah, Grandma's going to have to go turn tricks because there'll be no, welfare for her, no Social Security, but at least we won't be killing people. Whereas the anti-Ron Paul lefties were saying, well, he's for free enterprise, therefore he's a bum. But Rand Paul is a very different issue than Ron, and I wish Rand were more libertarian.
Okay. Thanks. My final question is actually about peaceful parenting. I think Stefan Molyneux said there's a contradiction when a parent says, don't hit your sister. And I know that you disagree, and I guess even if it doesn't lead to anarchy, what is the harm? I think either it does nothing or it can do good. Where do you think he's wrong in peaceful parenting, right? Isn't it better? Because, I mean, at least in my opinion, don't people mimic who they're around, and if people see that their parents are hitting, they'll probably think, oh, it's okay for me.
Well, there's that point, and certainly I don't favor child abuse. I mean, there are people that burn cigarettes out on their kids' skin. I mean, that's really sickening. Right. Even mentioning that sort of gives me the creeps. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about, are children full rights-bearing creatures? No, it's crazy. Look, kids, they need training. I don't know. I've heard of this case where a little boy, when he went to the urinal, he wanted to put his penis on the urinal, and his father said no, and he would hold him back and let him urinate without touching his penis to the urinal because the urinal was dirty. But the kid saw nothing wrong with that. It was 2 years old. Is the parent justified in using physical force to pull him a little bit back from the urinal? Now look, if you wanted to rub your penis on the urinal and I came up behind you and grabbed you and held you back, that would be assault and battery. And it would be unjustified because you're an adult. But a kid? Or a kid wants to go out and play in traffic and he's going to get killed, and you can't use physical force? Now, you don't have to spank, but you have to grab him. But grabbing is the use of physical force. Now, sometimes the Molyneux of the world, these pinko sissies, will say, well, and I use that word advisedly, and I'm going to be debating him on this, so maybe I should behave myself. Nah, what the hell, I'll let her rip. Go, yeah, Walter Moderate Block, go. Look, they say, well, how about a timeout? timeout is nonviolent. But look, if I gave you a timeout and I said, go stand in that corner, or you're going to go in your room and you can't watch TV, you would say, I'm going to call a cop. You can't do that to me. We're both adults. So you can't even give a kid a timeout if you're going to be logically consistent with children as full rights-bearing creatures. This idea is just crazy. And from a utilitarian point of view, I admit that if you spank or you give timeouts, the kid might get the wrong impression. But I think compared to, while we're in utilitarian, we have to weigh these things. We're talking about the safety of the child. And the safety of the child, you're not a good parent, you're not a good guardian if you don't safeguard your kid. And if the kid is running out in traffic and you don't grab him, you're not a good parent. Now, it's true that we might grab an adult, but that's a whole other issue. Milton Friedman attacks libertarianism by saying, what is it? He says, if you see somebody ready to jump off a bridge and commit suicide, I would grab him. Therefore, libertarianism is wrong. My answer to that is, yes, I would grab him too. And I would kidnap him for a day or two to try to say, look, now look, if the reason he's trying to commit suicide is in excruciating pain, I'm going to let him go. If the reason that he's trying to commit suicide is that his girlfriend broke up with him, I'm going to say, look, there are other girls, many fish in the sea, whatever. But after a while, I'd let him go. And then I would be willing to pay the penalty for it. Whereas this is where I get into my libertarian Nazi concentration camp guard. Here's the situation there. I want to save Jews, and I want to become a Nazi concentration camp guard. And the way the Nazi concentration camp guard works in my model of it is you have to kill 100 people a day. But I'll only kill 90. I have to kill at least 90, otherwise they'll catch on to me that I'm not really doing my job and they'll execute me and I won't be able to save anyone. But I'll save 10 people a day. And now, after a week, we have the Nuremberg trials, and I'm brought up for, for murder. I killed 7 times 90 people. I killed 630 people, but I saved 70 people, 10 a day. And I'm a hero. I'm a bloody hero because those 70 people would have died. And if I'm going to be executed, you got to give me a ticker-tape parade first because I'm a hero. I saved 70 precious lives. And the libertarian theory of punishment is that if the heirs of the victims want to see me executed, then they have the right. But I would say to them, look, I wish I could have saved your brother, mother, sister, cousin, uncle, whatever. I couldn't because I had to kill 90 people. Otherwise, I couldn't get away with saving anyone. And if you want to execute me, fine. I'm a hero. I'm willing to take my punishment. However, if you look at it from my point of view, I saved 70 people, so therefore you should let me go. And I throw my fate onto the court or to the jury. So I think Milton Friedman is wrong in saying, well, since you would save the guy from jumping off a bridge, your libertarianism, the non-aggression axiom, doesn't work. And David Friedman also has this cockamamie idea. Right. So that's sort of my look. I'm a professor. I have to be long-winded. That's my long-winded answer to your question about spanking children or using physical violence against children to. I
mean, what you say sort of makes sense because I think also for Molyneux to be consistent, he would have to say, well, you can't tell your child where to go to school, and you can't make him eat his broccoli and.
Right. No. And he wants just chocolate all day, and you want him to have some broccoli? No, you can't do that. I can't tell you to have broccoli if you want chocolate. So how should I be able to tell you if you're my 6-year-old son? The whole idea is just nonsense.
All right. Thank you very much for coming here, spending your time. I'd love to have you on maybe in like a month or so.
Sure, it's a pleasure. You asked very good questions, very challenging questions. It's just a pleasure. I'm delighted to meet you this way, and I'll be happy to be on your show again.
All right, thank you.
Take care.
Take care.